Hi friends, welcome back. So this week is actually going to be a part 2 to last week's video. If you haven't seen that video yet, you might want to go watch it, but then come back. Coming back is very important. For those of you who saw that video and maybe just forgot because it was in that weird period after Christmas but before New Year's, I got this DIY miniature kit from a subscriber, and I decided to completely customize the entire thing as a sort of candy-themed house for a bunch of cats. Here's how it's looking so far. So this week, we're going to continue on decorating the outside. Well, I'm going to decorate the outside, you're going to watch. But first, I need to move this slide out of the way. It's supposed to be glued on, but I knew I was going to need to get to the side of the house, so I didn't do that. Now, before I move on to decorating, I need to fix up a few places where I glued something on, and the glue sort of smeared, making these little shiny areas. Would anyone notice but me? Probably not, but it bothers me, so I'm gonna paint over them and touch them up. I just need to. Next, we have a few items to add to the outside of the house, starting with this little shelf that sits under the window with a cat and some plants on it. I painted it pink because remember the color scheme for this house is pink, blue, and yellow pastels. And then I glued it onto the house. I'm not actually sure that anything is going to fit under that window, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. Next, we have these canopies over the back window and the garage. I don't actually know what this giant door is. The canopies are just pieces of paper that I cut out, but the colors don't really match this house, so I used paint markers to repaint the stripes in colors that will match. If you think this is too extra, we'll just wait. This whole project gets really extra. I used an old instruction manual as scrap paper because I was too lazy to go find a clean sheet of paper and be more aesthetic. After the canopies were painted and dried, I'm supposed to wrap and glue these around a wire to, I guess, hold them straight. I have no idea how this was actually supposed to be done because paper doesn't roll perfectly evenly when it's that tiny, but I was at least able to use a ruler to fold the little flap at the bottom, so that was straight. The canopies then glue in using the rolled area, which actually looks okay. But before I glued the smaller canopy, I needed to glue this little ledge under the back window. Why? I have no idea. It's just in the instructions. Nothing sits on it, but maybe the cats need some place to, air out their stinky feet? Anyway, after that's on, I can put on this really wonky, smaller canopy. It's really slanted. I don't actually know how to fix that. Maybe just close one eye and tilt your head. Now I need to make a little flower box because, as you will come to see, these cats really love their foliage. So I glued this planter box together and then painted it pink too. Now for the flowers, well, they came with this white perforated paper. And white flowers are fine, but I wanted pastel purple instead. So I colored all of them, front and back. Was it worth the time that I took to make one side darker than the other? I mean, probably not really, but either way, I glued all 28 of them on these little, well, they call them stamens, but they're just like these scratchy wire things with a pearly bead at the end. The little planter also needs some grass, so I cut that out of this green paper from the kit, and of course painted a nice loose gradient on one side and a darker green on the other. Extra. I cut little blades of grass into the paper, that part is in the instructions, and then I wrapped those up in a little roll and glued them together. I made a couple of bundles of the little purple flowers, wrapped another set of cut grass around them, that I didn't bother to paint, and I glued it all together in a little bundle. I tried to smush the flowers out and bend down the blades of grass to give it a more natural look so that it's not so stiff and fake looking, but it still looks kind of weird. Then I glued everything into the little planter box. Well, I tried. They just don't fill the box enough to stand up straight. I tried bending the bottom of the bouquets to give it more of a base, but that didn't really work. So I just filled the whole box with glue like it was dirt. It still looks kind of but I need to move on, so I glued it onto the back of the house here. Then I needed to add this railing to the roof. I didn't do anything fancy to it except glue it on, but why is there a railing? The rest of the house doesn't exactly meet safety codes with wide open windows and the rest of the roof open, so I'm not sure why they're only concerned about falling off of this one corner. But oh well. Last, for now, is this little curtain on the front. They call it a curtain, I think it's a banner. Anyway, like the canopies, it's a paper piece that you cut out, and I'm gonna paint it. But just a light blue to match the house better. And though it was hard to hold on to without getting paint all over my hands, hence the toothpick method, the paint marker surprisingly didn't tear up the paper at all. And it didn't even make it flimsy or warp it too much. I did actually kind of like the pictures that were on the curtain banner, so I used a really fine tip paint marker to draw those back on. The cat is not my finest work, but it's fine. Just like the canopies, I glued a wire onto the top and then glued it into the doorway on the front of the house. What I didn't do was keep the doorway in frame. Now, with all of that done, I can do the most important outside decoration. Well, the one that I've been the most excited about. I'm going to use puffy paint to add a nice creamy frosting around the roof lines. It kind of looks like snow, but it's frosting. Even though I was super excited for this step, I was also pretty nervous for it, because if something goes wrong, there's no undoing it. But after the first few squirts, it looked really, really good. There were a few spots that were kind of hard to work around, like this downspout and the garden on the back, but I prevailed. I went around the top edge of the roof, and remember in part 1 I said there was a reason that I painted it white? That's because the whole roof is frosted like a cake. But I'm not adding puffy paint to the whole roof because there is some stuff that needs to go up there. I am going to add sprinkles, but I have been betrayed by puffy paint in the past, where when it dried it sort of deflated and then I had to do a second coat. So I didn't want to add sprinkles to the first coat and possibly have to waste them by covering it all up. So I left the whole thing to dry overnight. And of course, it dried perfectly without sinking in at all. So now I'm going to take these little pastel ball things and glue them all on. Yes, this is an extra step that wasn't necessary, but you live and you learn. I also frosted and sprinkled the slide. When I went to put the slide back, I realized that I forgot to leave space in the frosting for the slide, so I can't really glue it, but it fits just fine, so oh well, I'll just leave it as removable. Side note, after part 1 of this video, I got a ton more ideas and went on a shopping trip looking for specifically one thing, but came away with more than one thing. So I guess I gotta figure out how to fit these in. Now, for a few more decor items, first we have this ridiculous little hook. It's kind of boring looking, but it's ridiculous because it's incredibly tiny and serves absolutely no purpose. I am actually pretty familiar with working with wire, and I still struggled to make this. Look at it. It looks nothing like their stupid example. And why is it here? Nothing even hangs on it, and it doesn't even add that much to the look of the house. Stupid hook. I glued it on anyway, but I grumbled the whole time. Next, I need to make this flag, which again is a banner, but they call it a flag. The flagpole has this tiny little base to glue on, and then I painted the whole thing light pink. I cut out the 3 pieces of banner that were paper and painted them in the same colors as the canopy. Then they got folded and glued onto a thin wire. The wire I wrapped around the top of the flagpole and secured it with some glue. And then I propped it up to dry on a fish. Once it was dry, I glued the flagpole onto the base and wrapped the wire around the railing. I guess that's why the house needed a railing. I could have just glued the dumb hook up there. Moving on, this house has a little fence with a front gate, I guess to keep out any pesky dogs in the neighborhood. I painted all the pieces to make a nice little alternating pattern. Putting the gate together was actually kind of a neat process because you use this aluminum tape on one side so the gate can actually swing open. Then, after making a teeny tiny little handle and gluing it in, I used more wire to make little fake hinges on the front side of the gate. I made sure not to glue them too far in and block the gate from closing, and also not to accidentally get glue on the gate itself. I did not come up with this process. I'm not that clever. That was all in the instructions. To put the fence together, I laid out the pattern, then reversed it so that I could glue these long wooden pieces on the back. The fence needs to be even along the bottom so that I can glue them onto the base, so I used a paintbrush to line them up and then reline them up after I bumped them. When I went to put the fence up, I did need to trim some of the ends so that there was less of a gap between the fence pieces. We don't need any intruders sneaking in. I glued down the gate first and propped it up with a paintbrush so that the gate wouldn't lean to one side, and then I glued the rest of the fence on. Oh, it's so cute! It's really coming together. Next, we have some signs around the house because these cats really love their advertising. Well, maybe it's not advertising, maybe it's just like the cat equivalent of lawn flamingos and gnomes. Anyway, the wooden pieces popped out a little jagged, so I needed to sand them. I don't really understand why some pieces come separate and clean cut, and some are in a wooden sheet that I need to pop out. One of their signs is freestanding, with this little cat head glued onto a cut-off toothpick. I painted that one blue. And then there's this long frame, because you know how you have frame pictures on the outside of your house? That I painted pink. Okay, now for the signs themselves. They're kinda, like, who needs a sign telling your neighbors you're a happy cat? So, being the person with a too much gene, I measured each sign, went to a design app, and redesigned each of them myself. Was this extra 2 hours of work worth it? 1000%. They are so cute. I printed them out with lots of extras in case I messed up, and then I cut and glued them onto the frames. I also made sure to paint the edges of the wood backing to match because these cats are judgmental and they expect nothing less. So first we have this little cat head sign which has their address, 123 Meow Court. It didn't come out super clear because I didn't think through the font that I chose, but I am proud of how close the blues are. And court is shortened CT, like cat. Get it? Yeah, anyway, I'll just glue that right up here by the slide. Next is another address sign, but this one with a rainbow gradient in the background. And the font on this is much better, except my measuring was just slightly off on one side. Whoops. This one goes on the front of the house in case the mailman can't read their other sign. Then we have this little cat face sign, which used to just say cat, but this is much more refined. We also have a no dog sign. It used to be some kind of writing, but I know better than to put up a sign I can't read. Who knows what it could actually say? Over here on the side is that framed picture. It used to say cat house, but I think we know that by now, so I changed it to a bunch of little cats. Next, we need some nice landscaping for this house. Remember I said these cats love their foliage? First, we have this tree. The kit came with these green papers with the leaves already perforated, but if you think we're going to have a plain green tree, you have not been paying attention. This tree is going to have pink leaves. So I painted leaves in 3 different pinks and spent far too long popping all of those leaves out. The tree itself is kind of a weird, dull grayish brown, so I threw on a thin coat of brown paint. This actually wasn't me doing too much. The instructions do say to paint the tree brown. Then I began the tedious task of gluing the leaves on. The clothespins are my makeshift tripod to keep the tree standing. Figuring out how to make things stand up while drying is my true calling. I hand placed all of these leaves with dots of glue and tweezers, making sure to get the front and back. Then, once it was finally looking full enough, it still was looking kind of boring. I think maybe because the green paper sort of dulled the pink paint, so it needs something shiny, something sparkly. So I used this neon pink glitter glue and added dots around the tree like little flowers. It's so much better. The tree also has this flimsy little base to make it stand, but I used an absolute buttload of glue to stick it to the base of the house. This house also has a ton of bushes made out of paper, actually 24 bushes to be precise, but I didn't just want to plant plain, boring green bushes. No, I wanted colorful gradient bushes. So I painted each piece of paper with 3 color gradients on both sides of the paper. Granted, these aren't my best gradients, and the green paper does show through a bit, but these are going to go through a lot more transforming anyway. I cut all of these into little blades of grass, and then I wrapped them all into tiny little bundles. I figured out that using tweezers to hold the end and then spinning it made wrapping these up go so much faster and easier. Then I spent another 20 minutes shaping them with tweezers. Yes, it was time consuming, but it just looks so much better than when I was just trying to squish and crunch them. Plus, at this point in the build, I'm actually pretty zoned out because I'm like in the middle of the marathon. The finish line isn't in sight, so I'm just kind of forced to focus on each step and not really worry about anything else. Now, before I plant all of these babies, I have one more thing to make. The instructions have more of these flowers, but I wanted something more candy themed. What I wanted was gumdrops, and that's actually what I went shopping for in the first place, but what I came up with is gluing these teeny tiny pom-pom puff balls, which are actually incredibly hard to find in the store, by the way, to these little flower sequins. My first plan did not work, so let me just tell you what not to do. My plan was to glue these balls to the sequins around the hole, and then once they dried, I was going to put a piece of wire through the hole and glue it in. However, the balls are so fluffy that they weren't really touching as much of the glue as I needed to adhere correctly, so I used clothespins to squish them down. Well, that ended up pushing the pom-poms down over the hole so much that after they were dry and I tried to push a wire into it, it just popped the pom-pom right off. So, plan B. I wrapped a tiny little loop in the wire, strung another sequin on, and then glued the pom-pom sequin on top, sandwiching the wire in between. It's definitely not what I was envisioning, and probably not that sturdy, but I just made sure to be insanely careful with it, and basically touch the flower part as little as possible. This is one of the most just make it work projects I've ever done. I made 3 bundles of pom-pom flowers, adding in some of those pearly stamen things, and I wrapped them with wire, adding some glue to hold them. Now, to add everything to the house, I knew that these wouldn't stand on their own, so I put them inside one of the bushes so that it would hold it up. Then I planted everything around the house with lots of glue. If it ends up looking butt when it dries, I do have a plan to cover it up. I also added a lazy Susan turntable thing underneath to make it easier to work around the house without constantly picking up the base and possibly bumping something that I didn't want to bump. I did mostly try to follow the instructions on where to place the plants, but also by this point, does it really matter? So after it all dried, it doesn't look like butt. So all I'm going to do is paint over the base of this tree so that it blends in. And then I'm going to end this video here. Yes, whoever said they didn't think I'd be able to finish this in part 2, you were correct. There's just too much to do. But I will 1,000,000% promise you that I will finish this next week. I already have most of the rest of this done. So what do you think so far? We still have the furniture to add, and of course the cats themselves, but I'm really happy with how this is going. I can't wait to see how it all turns out in the end. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.